For more on the European elections, we can bring in Paul Taylor, a columnist for the European edition of The Guardian and a senior visiting fellow at the European Policy Centre. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Now, once MEPs enter the EU Parliament, they form groups that span across, the different countries. How similar are the programs of each party from country to country? For example, do all of the Green parties have the same platform?
They have broadly the same platform. Some of them are, for example, much more militant about the war going on in Gaza at the moment than others, depending on their country of origin. But these are, to some extent, transnational elections. It's the only multinational election of its kind in the world. But they're also 27 national elections where the unspoken name on the ballot box on the ballot paper is the home government, and where people will be given an opportunity in a sort of midterm election to give their own government a kicking. I think that's what's likely to happen in France, for example.
And tell us, what are some of the biggest issues in this year's election?
Well, fundamentally what's at stake in this election is whether the pro-European centre can hold, despite growing support for Eurosceptic hard-right parties who want a very different kind of Europe. It's a question of how centralized or decentralized Europe will be, how open or how closed to the world in trade, also in migration. And there are a lot of identity issues, if you like, culture war type issues around the rights of women, the rights of gay people, asylum seekers, and so on. Some of the big challenges, well, since 2019, Europe has been through a pandemic, a cost of living, inflation crisis, and a war in Ukraine, with another war close to its borders in the Middle East. So there's been a lot of shaking up. The challenges are to give Ukraine decisive assistance, to build a credible European defense, which had been neglected for many years after the end of the Cold War, to see the green transition through, and that's one of the most controversial and central issues. Are we going too fast? Are we not going fast enough to wean ourselves off fossil fuels to get towards the net zero carbon emissions target, and to do so without crippling farmers, the working class, commuters, people who may be less able to afford the changes. And then there's the challenge of keeping Europe's economy competitive in a world where both the United States and China are giving massive subsidies to their industries. So should Europe do the same? Should it remain more open to global trade? Those are some of the issues that people are fighting over. This is a continent with an aging and shrinking population, which explains some of the conservative reflexes we may see in this election.
And can you talk us through what some of the key policy differences are on those issues? For example, maybe defense and immigration?
Well, on defense, basically, most parties agree, with the exception of the far left and the far right, that Europe should be spending a lot more on defense. Some people want to see that build up as a European defense itself. Others want to see it within NATO, within the Atlantic Alliance more. And some are in favor of giving every possible assistance to Ukraine and ensuring that Ukraine can win, so that Putin is stopped in Ukraine and doesn't move on to other juicy targets in Europe. Others are more sympathetic to Mr. Putin, and you see that in some of the parties on the far right in particular. So that's one of the big differences. There are other big differences, as I say, around the pace of the green transition. There's been a backlash. You saw farmers' demonstrations in many countries earlier this year. And so there's a sense that the parties, particularly on the right, are saying, stop this transition has got to go more slowly. We're not sure about phasing out the internal combustion engine and moving entirely to electric cars. We shouldn't be forcing people to switch to heat pumps. We should be more flexible and so on. On the other hand, there are a lot of people on the left, in the Greens, and some in the centre-right as well, saying, no, we've got to see this through. We must make it work. Yes, we've got to be more sensitive to the needs of people who can't afford these things and who will need financial support to make their homes, for example, more energy efficient, to introduce heat pumps instead of their gas or electric heaters and so on. All these things are issues in the campaign.
And just briefly, because we're running out of time, there is typically pretty low turnout for European elections. Do you think that's going to continue this year, or kind of how would you rate the overall enthusiasm level across Europe?
Well, the surveys that have been done suggest there's going to be a higher turnout this year. Last time in 2019, the long decline was reversed, and the turnout did actually top 50% of the European electorate. This time, it could be up significantly. More young people voting. That may be more protest votes for the far right, because young people are more likely to cast an anti-establishment vote, even if they are regarded as being more pro-European. So I think we'll see a bigger turnout in most places. I think we'll see some anti-government votes in some places. As I say, France, Germany will be another one. And I think we will see more seats for the far right. But I believe that the central coalition of Christian Democrats, Social Democrats, and Liberals, which your subject described, I think that will hold. And that will continue to govern Europe, perhaps with the support of the Greens.
All right, we'll have to wait and see next weekend. It's going to be interesting, as you say, on a national and a Europe-wide level. Paul Taylor, thank you so much again for your analysis. That's Paul Taylor, a columnist for the European edition of The Guardian and senior visiting fellow at the European Policy Center.